And the idea for today's video was to talk about Batman vs Superman, but then I realized everybody in the world already talked about this movie. So then I thought, why not talk about all crossover movies that ever existed? My name is Gus and I love to talk about trash movies more than anyone that I consider normal in this world. And who doesn't like one great clash of titans? David versus Goliath, Achilles versus Hector, monsters of the Greek mythology clashing and fighting. This idea of the great myths fighting always fascinated us and the movie producers, especially the horror ones. And I got a great weak spot for this kind of concept, and can be any kind of clash, even dogs versus cats. And if we dig the first crossovers that ever appeared in the history of cinema, we will have to go back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, with very unusual crossovers like Billy the Kid versus Dracula, Dracula versus Frankenstein, Werewolf meets the Frankenstein, which is a classic of Universal, by the way, which means that there was already a love for monsters fighting in the past, but not only the small ones, the big ones as well. Especially Godzilla vs King Kong from 1962, a great classic. And let's not talk about this CGI mess of today that I don't care at all. We are talking about royalty here. King Kong shoving a broccoli inside Godzilla's mouth. And if there is one creature in the history of cinema that loves crossovers, he is the big lizard himself, who fought so many monsters of his own universe, even a version of himself, but mechanized. And there was one instance of the possibility of a clash between Godzilla and Batman, but not the Batman you are imagining. And yes, the 1966 version of Adam West. In a movie that would be called Batman Meets Godzilla, we would see the Caped Crusader traveling to Japan with the boy wonder Robin, and both would meet Godzilla there. But anyway, with the arrival of the 80s, and the great horror slashers like Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers, the producers start to think more about the idea of clashing one of these two icons. And the most obvious examples were, obviously, the most popular ones at the time, Jason and Freddy. So the idea was already born in the 80s, and took a little time to finally be fulfilled, when the studios Paramount of Jason and New Line Cinema of Freddy start to negotiate the characters' rights to put them together. That was about right after Friday the 13th Part 6 Jason Lives, that came out in 1986. So obviously the negotiations fell through, and Friday the 13th Part 7 The New Blood was about Jason fighting Carrie, at least a kind of Carrie character that had the powers of Jean Grey from X-Men. It was only when Paramount sold the rights to the Friday the 13th franchise to New Line Cinema, and New Line Cinema had the rights of both characters, that things became easy. At least you would think so, because it took more 10 years to finally make this movie. There were scripts after scripts being written, one worse than the other. By the way, I read one of these scripts that had some crazy ideas in it, like for example a cult of Freddy that had a bunch of teenagers that scarred themselves to look like him, and the fight between Jason and Freddy only took place by the end of the movie in a real ring that was in hell. And again, if I'm not mistaken, by the end of the movie there was a cameo appearance of Pinhead from Hellraiser, which appeared in the middle of the fight to make both guys stop fighting. Anyway, as you can imagine, it was ridiculous and very expensive to be produced. And in 2003, we finally had our Freddy vs. Jason, which had some ideas from previous scripts integrated into the script, and it was a fun trash movie that I kinda like to watch. So the other horror icons couldn't be left behind, because in the next year we had other clash between slashers, but not slashers from our world, from other worlds, AVP. The idea first came about in the 80s when the second Aliens movie was released and the first Predator was released, because the Dark Horse Comics, the great publishing company, released a miniseries called Aliens vs. Predators. And it was a big hit that opened the possibility for these two creatures to cross over with many other characters, most famously Batman. And I had the comic book Batman vs. Predator as a child, and I loved it. By the way, there was an adaptation to live action for these two characters in the form of the short movie Batman Dead End, which featured Alien as well. But I always wanted to see this idea being fulfilled in the big screen as a real feature. By the way, if one day somehow Warner Brothers becomes interested in this idea, you can call me. I have a whole script in my mind for Batman vs. Predator. You can call me. But I guess Disney has the rights to Predator now, so I guess it would be much more possible Iron Man versus Predator or Mickey versus Predator, which I can write a script as well. And after the comics, we had many games of Aliens versus Predator. And what I liked about those games is that we had Predators and Aliens with many different colors. And in my little mind as a child, I always imagined this idea of Aliens and Predators clashing with all those colors. And the first person to write a movie script about this idea was a guy called Peter Briggs in the early 90s. I remember I read the beginning of this script while I was in a bus coming back from work, but I slept in the first 10 pages, which meant that I don't know if they were very good. Anyway, the project was passed in 20th Century Fox until Roland Emmerich, the director of Independence Day and Godzilla, the one that nobody likes, got his hands on the project and wrote a script with his partner Dean Devlin. But then this idea was scrapped as well, and a genius guy named Paul W.S. Anderson got his filthy hands on the project. Yes, a genius behind Mortal Kombat, Event Horizon, Soldier, and eventually some trash, garbage, but kind of fun Resident Evil movies. And he did what nobody could and nobody wanted. He wrote a script, he shot the movie, and released it. And well, the movie is okay. I think it's okay because it's trash, but it's also garbage because it's trash as well. In this case, I have a big problem because Alien and Predator, especially Alien, is royalty to me. The first two Alien movies and the first Predator are among my top 10 movies of my life. So somebody ruining these two franchises makes me very angry, which the producers keep doing with the Alien franchise, although we had a big surprise with Prey, the 5th movie of Predator that was released last year. I love that movie. But what I most hate about this Alien vs. Predator movie is that its existence meant the cancellation of another project that was about to be written by James Cameron and directed by Ridley Scott in the early 2000s. Yes, James Cameron was coming back to the franchise to write another movie of Aliens, probably Alien 5, and Ridley Scott was going to direct it. But because the studio had the amazingly beautiful and the most stupid idea in the history of mankind of choosing the project Alien vs. Predator over this project, James Cameron gave up on the idea. Which, by the way, would feature the return of Sigourney Weaver and probably Arnold Schwarzenegger in the franchise. Imagine Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Alien franchise as well. So let's not even spend saliva talking about the second Alien vs. Predator, please. Anyway, let's talk about something much more beautiful and bright. Recently I discovered a crossover that not many people talk about, but it's probably one of the big pearls in the history of cinema. Because I'm not only talking about a crossover, but it's a shared universe way before the one you're thinking about, and much better, from the studio Full Moon Pictures. A studio that produced many classics from the B-movies like Puppet Master. By the way, the whole franchise of Puppet Master. Follow this timeline. In 1991, Full Moon Pictures produced a movie called Doll Man. This movie was directed by Albert Pyun, the guy who directed many great classics of trash action movies, including Cyborg with Jean-Claude Van Damme. And Doll Man is the story of a cop that lives on another planet in another galaxy that comes to Earth and gets lost after chasing an intergalactic criminal. But in our world, he is the size of an action figure. And it's a very fun movie which features a very good actor called Jackie Earle Haley, who played Rorschach in Watchmen from Zack Snyder, and Freddy Krueger in the remake of 2010. Then, in 1992, Full Moon produced other two pictures that are kinda interconnected with Doll Man. A movie called Bad Channels, which features an alien that comes to Earth and invades a radio station, and using radio waves and rock and roll, which by the way, great songs in the soundtrack of this movie. These radio waves kidnap girls from the city of the movie and shrink them. And by shrinking them, they put them on little jars to make experiments with them later. Remember this fact, shrink them. In the same year, you had Demonic Toys, another classic of horror movies. The story is about these toys that are possessed by a demon who wants a body on Earth, and he has to impregnate a woman to do so. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but he needs to impregnate a woman to get a body for himself. That's what it means. Anyway, the plots of these three movies culminated in a fourth movie that was released in 1993, Dollman vs. Demonic Toys, which features Dollman facing the demonic toys, but with one girl from bad channels, one of the girls that was shrinked. So look how genius is this timeline. The hero from the first movie met the girl from the second movie and the villains of the third movie in the fourth movie. This is genius! And better yet, Dollman vs. Demonic Toys has only 1 hour of length and features flashbacks from the three movies in case you haven't seen them before. I mean, Dollman tells his story, the girl tells her story, and the demonic toys tell their story. By the way, I'm discovering a whole world of great classics from Full Moon Pictures, and I will talk about them in a future video. And to wrap it up, let's go back to the mainstream and talk about the movie that gave me the idea to make this video. As any crossover, it took a long time to finally be produced. The first script was written by a guy named Andrew Kevin Walker, who wrote a very bright and happy movie called Seven. So yes, the first version of Batman vs. Superman was dark, so dark that you couldn't even see the movie. So they called a guy to give some color to the script, and they called a screenwriter that had some experience with bright and colorful movies, Akiva Goldsman from Batman and Robin. So he wrote a script that the story featured a Joker who killed a Batman's fiancée in his honeymoon by using a robotic bee that had poison. The bee got the girl, killed her. Batman got so angry that he returned to be the Caped Crusader and decided to go after the Joker for his final revenge, this time deciding to kill him. This is when Superman comes to the story and has to stop him, so both fight. In the end, you would realize that all of this was a plan of Lex Luthor, and the fiancée of Bruce Wayne was not real because she was a clone made in a lab. So the plan was to make this bride for Bruce Wayne so he could fall in love, so the Joker could kill her, so he would get angry and want revenge, and then Superman would stop. Oh my god, I'm having a headache. And believe it or not, this movie was going to be produced with this story. At the time, Colin Farrell was going to be the Batman and Jude Law was going to be Superman for some reason. It was a great cast, and also it had a great director, Wolfgang Petersen, who directed great classics like Das Boot, Enemy Mine, and my personal favorite, The Never-Ending Story. But thanks to the gods, this project was cancelled, and actually thanks to the gods because Wolfgang Petersen moved on from this project to Troy with Brad Pitt, which means that this Batman vs. Superman was going to be released in 2004, but instead, Troy was released. And it took more 10 years for DC, Warner, and the great Zack Snyder to decide to bring these two characters together for a clash. And we finally got BVS, which is a movie that... Listen, I like BVS. I think the dialogue created by Chris Terrio for the script is great. I love the fact that there is a mythological undertone to the whole story, something that Zack Snyder is very good in creating for his movies and is very fitting to the DC characters, but the whole storyline is very convoluted. There's so many plots and it's so long, and listen, again, something that pissed me off. Batman wanted to fight Superman, but Superman didn't want to fight Batman. It was all an unnecessary, convoluted plan from Lex Luthor again. In the end, it's an experience that is kind of exhausting, but, you know, I kind of like it because it features two of my favorite superheroes. And now comes the question, which will be the great next crossover that Hollywood will bring to us? I don't think the producers and the studios are very interested in this kind of concept anymore, but I am. And comment below which of these crossovers that I mentioned in this video is your favorite. If I forgot any other, mention here too. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so I can continue this project of bringing trashiness to our lives. And by the way, my own original character, Joe Ripper, has a crossover story in his channel, Joe Ripper versus the Fairy Tales, which I will put the link of the 3 episodes of this saga in the subscription below. And don't forget to check the link of my ebook on Amazon, a big epic adventure in a universe of angels and demons called The Angel of Fire and Steel. Is in a link right below too. And that's it. See you in the next Trashing It with Gus. Bye bye.